Chapter 15. Braxton Montag Petticoat Archibald was the future, the firstborn son of Winston Bishop Petticoat Archibald and Virginia Commonwealth Archduke Capricorn Archibald. In other words, Braxton was the result of two members of two of the world's most wealthy, powerful, and influential families, uniting beneath the banner of matrimony. Between the two families was multiple billions in net worth, countless megacorporations with their hands in every single aspects of every single industry, the power and influence to shape the trajectory of the world, and so much more. To say that Braxton had a good life would be the largest understatement ever. From birth, his family had been preparing him to continue his family's legacy of generating wealth at any cost. By the age of 10, he could speak 8 languages: English, Spanish, Mandarin, Japanese, French, German, Italian, and Latin. A little-known fact about members of the top 1% of the top 1% is that they sometimes like to speak to each other exclusively in Latin. They prefer the dead language as a reminder to all those beneath them that their power can give life to a dead language. Also because they never had to worry about the help eavesdropping. On the night of the mix-up, 14-year-old Braxton was in his dorm room at his boarding school. He attended the most prestigious prep boarding school in the world, as all members of both the Archibalds and Capricorns had for generations. It was his birthright to have the finest education money could buy, an education that would combine with his family's vast, unlimited wealth to open every single door in the world for him someday. The school was hidden from the public eye and pulled no punches. They were paid handsomely by the parents of their students to not only mold them but discipline them. Corporate punishment was legal. Students were not allowed access to modern technologies like televisions or smartphones. Their computers were limited to only necessary programs such as word processing and training software. They couldn't even use the internet for research. It had to be done in the library, the old-fashioned way. The students were grilled. They worked hard. They were fed the finest food in the world from well-trained chefs, and they came out on the other side better for having experienced it all. Braxton was writing a 20-page paper on the topic of international finance and how world markets can be negatively impacted by raising the wages of workers. The trick with this paper was that Braxton and all the other students in the class were required to switch languages with each paragraph. In the moments just before things changed over, Braxton had finished a chapter written in Mandarin, positing that workers should be grateful to earn any compensation for their work, and that it was not the obligation of the ruling class to concern themselves with matters regarding the inferior. He was just beginning his next paragraph in French. This one would further illuminate his point by reminding the reader that although uneducated workers talked a big game about needing wages for things like food, shelter, health care, and their children, they were at least smart enough to know they didn't have a choice. Therefore, their demands should always go ignored. One moment, Braxton was at his desk, typing the word proletariat, and the next he was on his back, staring up at a TV screen with an American football game on it, an abhorrible game. His vision had turned to a blur, and all the strength and energy had been sucked from his body. It felt worse than the worst flu he had ever experienced. He tried to get up, but lacked the strength. He looked at his hands and noticed how old and wrinkly they were. He also noticed the IVs inserted into each. He craned his head side to side and saw all the machines he was hooked up to. He was in a hospital bed, and he was old. The American football game on the TV had descended into madness. There was a woman in the room. He hadn't noticed her at first, but she was there, stumbling around and mumbling in Russian, a language he had always wanted to learn. It didn't matter, though. Once she got a glimpse of the TV, she bounded out the door and into the chaos of the hospital hall. Braxton was able to turn his head enough to see through the open door that the hospital had descended into a madness not unlike what was happening on the TV screen. The new brain his consciousness inhabited was weak with age and inhibited his ability to think straight. All he could tell was that he was now in a new body, an old, very sick and dying body. He was clearly on pain medication via one of these IV drips. It was probably contributing to his brain fog. There was no use in trying to get up. His new old body would not allow it. All he could do was lay there and hope that this was a horrible dream and that he would soon wake up back in his dorm room and finish his paper. no one came. Eventually, the hospital emptied out and the power died. Soon, he stopped receiving his pain medication, which led to his body sending urgent messages to his brain. The messages were screaming with pain. He was dying. His new old body was being ravaged by something. It was advanced cancer. He had jumped into the body of someone on their deathbed. He lay there in too much pain to sleep, crying and wishing there was someone around who could help. Someone to whom he could say, "Do you know who my dad is?" Then make some calls and arrange for whatever payment necessary to make this all go away. But there was no one, and there was no hope. Eventually, his tired body became numb to the pain. His eyelids got heavy, and the world around him began to fade away. He was supposed to become one of the most powerful people in the world. Instead, he was too weak to even cry as the cancer suffocated him from the inside. Chapter 16. It was nearly nightfall when the caravan arrived in Guidance. There was a brisk fall chill on the air despite it only being early September. The check-in process at the outer settlement had taken longer than expected. I see there's not supposed to be any more necked caravans this season, said the keeper of the greater Newcastle Territory Outer Settlement 6. Keeper was the term used in the GNT to describe the person in charge of relations with visitors from other settlements, something of a concierge, a liaison. Trent knew this from intel the net had gathered on GNT over the years. We're not here to trade, said Dan, Trent's assistant, bodyguard, and best friend. We're on official duty. Is, someone expecting you? Yeah, Henry. The sound of the founder's name caught the keeper's attention. I haven't heard anything. Let me, radio the capital. Take your time. 5 minutes later, the keeper returned with his crew. They gave the caravan a look, standard routine security procedure required for all incoming vehicles. Why so many wagons if not here to trade? Got a principal with us. Can't be too careful, even here. The keeper let out an impressed whistle. Don't think we ever had a principal come through. Trent decided it was time for him to finally enter the conversation. Only not as Trent, as Tara, the part he had been playing since before arriving at Old Glory some 12 years prior. We don't like leaving OG if we don't have to. The keeper took a step back upon realizing that Tara was the principal. My apologies, said the keeper, waiting on clarification for how to address the net royalty sitting before him. Ma'am works. After so many years pretending, the word ma'am had begun to roll off Trent's tongue so naturally he had almost started to believe it. Eventually the inspection came to an end, and the caravan took their leave of the keeper and GNT Outer Settlement 5. Nearly 6 hours later they pulled into Guidance and were greeted by their keeper. This one, a man's mind living in a man's body, had been properly briefed as to whom he was expecting. He rolled out the metaphorical red carpet for Trent and his entourage. Must be tired from your trip, ma'am. Exhausted. Well, lucky for you, the Guidance Inn has been especially designed to house important visitors who come through our territory, for business or for pleasure. I was unaware that anyone came to Newcastle for anything but business. 30 minutes later, he was in his room waiting for dinner to be ready. It was an impressive suite that reminded him more of life before the mix-up, his real life, than those he had lived since things changed over. From the balcony, the Newcastle capital could be seen in the distance, perched atop a hill in all its brilliance. The place he had heard so much about since first joining the net as a scavenger. Since then, he had dreamt of one day visiting the famed territory and gaining an audience with their illustrious founder, the man who now occupied Trent Steele's body, the body that had once belonged to him. 15 years earlier, he was welcomed to the New World with a brain-cracking crunch. The woman whose body he suddenly found himself in had been driving. During the collective disorientation that blanketed the world in those first moments, he had veered into oncoming traffic and taken a shot to the front passenger side from a luxury car. Or perhaps the luxury car had been the one who veered into the wrong lane. Who cared? There were more important matters at hand, such as what is happening and what the hell is happening. The view through the spider-webbed windshield was still too obscured to make sense of where he was. His brain was still rattling around his skull from the collision, rendering his thoughts a jumbled mess. He buried his head in his hands, covering his eyes, then closing them, trying to block the world out to find some footing. He took some deep, cleansing breaths while massaging his temples. "Get it together, man. Get it together, man. Get it together, man." He must have muttered it close to 100 times. Finally, he went silent and unleashed one final exhale. "You're okay. You're gonna be okay," he thought to himself before pulling his newly feminine hands from his face and opening his eyes to find himself still in the crashed car behind the spider-webbed windshield and smoking engine. Fuck. Gunshots rang out, in the distance but loud enough to catch his attention. He looked through the space where the passenger window had been and saw commotion in the streets. No, not commotion. Chaos. Definitely chaos. More gunshots. Were they closer? Further? Same gun? He couldn't tell. What he did know was that he needed to get the hell out of there. He slowly opened the driver's side door and stepped out. For the first time, he took stock of his new body. Female. Probably early 20s, but he wouldn't know for certain until he saw his face. Average height. Fit. Probably attractive. He started to move around. The movement was fluid. Strong. His new body had some athleticism. He was still far from understanding what was happening, but he was confident he could work with this body. An explosion rang out from about a block away, sending debris bouncing down the street. By the time it reached where he was, it was harmless. The sight of it hinted at more to come. A woman came running from the direction of the explosion. She was bleeding from everywhere and screaming. A piece of rebar had gone clean through her midsection and remained there. She lost her energy, stumbled around a while mumbling incoherently, then crumbled to the asphalt and died. "Jesus," muttered Trent. His instinct was to get back in the car and drive off. If only the car was useless. But he began taking better stock of the street he was on. It was a city, somewhere in Europe, maybe Eastern Europe. That was all he could tell. Wherever it was, he had never been. The scene was getting more chaotic by the second. He needed to put as much distance between himself and the madness as he could, as fast as possible. He began moving through the chaos swiftly, but cautiously, trying not to draw any attention. He checked the cars scattered throughout the street. Most were crashed like his. Finally, he found one that had driven onto the sidewalk and stopped before making contact with anything, but not anyone. There was a body a few feet away from the dented and blood-covered front bumper. The door was closed, and the car wasn't running. But the keys were conveniently still in the ignition, and the door was unlocked. Without hesitation, Trent got in. It was a nice car, a luxury sedan, the kind of car he would have driven in the old world had he not had a driver. And as an added bonus, it had a full tank of gas. He fired up the engine, peeled out, and didn't stop until the city streets gave way to country roads. Even then, he didn't stop. He drove until the car gave into its empty tank of gas. There wasn't much around. The road was empty. But there were some farmhouses in the distance. It was only mid-afternoon. Trent hadn't eaten or gone to the bathroom since waking up in his new body. He got out of the car and relieved himself in the middle of the road. It was strange having to squat. He already missed his old parts. He wondered how many other people throughout the world were experiencing the same feeling. Then he wondered where his real body might be. His mind flashing to thoughts of Mariposa and the restaurant at the fancy hotel they had been staying at. Considering what he had seen back in the city, he didn't like the odds of his real body nor Mariposa's surviving the onslaught. While wiping his hands on his tight-fitting jeans, he felt a wave of nausea at the thought that this change was permanent. If his mind was in this body, what happened to the mind that belonged to it? Was it in his real body? Was it a one-to-one switch? If so, why her? If not, where was the mind that belonged to his new body? and whose mind now occupied his real body. Assuming his real body wasn't face down and bleeding out on the floor of the restaurant where he had been enjoying breakfast with Mariposa. To avoid the puddle he had just left on the asphalt, he stumbled as far away as he could before his legs gave out and his face bounced off the road. He closed his eyes and waited for the wave of anxiety to pass. You're alive. This is fucked, but you're alive. It's not a dream. It's real, but you're alive. Now get your ass up and go find food and shelter. His eyes opened, and he slowly peeled himself up off the road. His soft new hand prodded his right cheek where it had slammed into the ground moments earlier and came back without any blood on it. He wobbled as he rose, but eventually found safe footing. His new stomach grumbled. I know. He stretched, then climbed atop the roof of the car to get a better look at his surroundings. Beyond the farmhouses, there appeared to be some towns or villages. Definitely Europe, he thought. Gotta be Eastern. As much as he would have liked to just get back in the car and sleep, there was the empty, grumbling stomach. His mind had managed to grip the situation as best it could for now. He knew what was happening. Like everyone else, he had no idea why. He knew not to trust anyone, and he knew that if he was going to survive, he was going to need weapons and a safe place to stay. With that in mind, he ignored the towns and began making his way toward the nearest farmhouse. Guidance's keeper had insisted upon dining with Tara. Although a twist, it was far from a surprise. He had been playing the part of Tara long enough to expect this type of behavior. Not every day you get a chance to meet a net principal, had been the keeper's exact words. Total fabrication. He knew that. The keeper saw an opportunity and used getting to dine with the principal as his excuse, his in. The chefs prepared them a fine meal. Ribeye steaks, mashed potatoes, fresh cooked vegetables in a well-aged Italian red from Newcastle's reserves. Trent didn't like the way the keeper looked at him. He was a man in a man's body who thought he was dining with a woman in a woman's body. The whole concept of same mind and body elitism was something Trent had seen coming in the early days. Although it hadn't panned out on a mass scale, it had on an individual one. Some same mind-body folks thought themselves better than mismatches. Trent's decision to play the part of a woman in a woman's body had served him well, even if the memories of some of the things he'd had to do to survive, especially in the early years, kept him up at night, unable to be forgotten no matter how hard he tried. Having jumped into the body of an attractive woman had only made things more challenging. By year 15, he had grown used to being leered at, but he still didn't like it. Jeffrey, the keeper, clearly had lust in his eyes when he looked at Trent, and on his tongue when he spoke. Trent could only play along, play the part of Tara. It was the closest thing he would ever get to being in another movie. It wasn't just vital to his survival, it was vital to his company. After all, the GNT was a key ally of the net. The last thing he wanted to do was piss off a keeper, especially ahead of his big meeting with the founder. The thing he'd been covertly working toward for more than a decade. Jeffrey droned on and on about his accomplishments both in the old world and the new. Before everything changed over, he had worked at a hedge fund and been quite successful. At least that's what he said. He had no way of knowing that there were few things in the old world that impressed Trent less than being in finance. In the new world, Jeffrey had joined GNT around year 5 and worked his way up from scout to soldier to bodyguard and finally keeper. He was a true GNT success story, much in the same way Trent was a net success story. The one benefit of Jeffrey's complete lack of self-awareness was that Trent never had to go through the trouble of telling his made-up backstory. For that to happen, Jeffrey would have to stop talking about himself long enough to do anything other than shove more steak down his throat. It's not that telling the fake backstory would have been an issue for Trent. He had told it and retold it and refined it so many times over the years that if he didn't know better, he might think it was true. But he was tired and didn't even feel like being there, let alone telling his fake story. All he wanted was to sleep, so that tomorrow would come sooner, but gotta keep up appearances. So he smiled, nodded, and ate his food while Jeffrey annoyed the living hell out of him. Eventually, Their plates were clean and their glasses were empty. It was time for Jeffrey to make his move. Luckily, Trent had an easy and very much believable excuse locked and loaded. So, I was thinking we, could take a walk around Guidance. Sunset is, lovely this time of year. Then, maybe I could interest you in another glass of wine from my private reserves. Okay, it's showtime, thought Trent. He'd already written the script in his mind. All he had to do was deliver the dialogue. It was time for Tara to come to life. Oh, Jeffrey, you have no idea how fun that sounds. Lies. But me and my crew have been on the road for 5 days, and I'm famished. True. I have a big meeting with Henry tomorrow. I need to be well rested and sharp. Also true. If I didn't have the meeting tomorrow, I would definitely accept. Massive lie. You understand, right? Trent could clearly read the disappointment on Jeffrey's face. He rested his right hand on Jeffrey's forearm to assure him. As always, it worked. Jeffrey's look of disappointment morphed into acceptance and even understanding. He nodded. Yeah, duh, of course. What the hell was I thinking? No, it's totally fine. You're meeting Henry tomorrow. Henry? He doesn't meet with just anyone these days. You need to be on your shit. Glad you understand. Jeffrey rose from his seat. Trent followed. The itinerary your bodyguard showed me has your meeting at noon, right? Yes, noon. Okay. Yeah, you're going to want to hit the road no later than 10. We'll, be sure to have breakfast ready for you and your squad first thing in the morning. Get you fueled up before you hit the road. I'm sure there'll be food waiting for you at the castle. I have to say, Jeffrey, your hospitality is second to none. I can see why they made you a keeper. Even before he said it, Trent knew that line would be a winner. As expected, Jeffrey's reaction was one of pure pride and satisfaction. Thank you. Coming from, a net principal like that, really means something. I hope our paths cross again after your meeting. Perhaps. Trent's itinerary listed another night in Guidance as an option depending on how the meeting went. There was no chance in hell of it happening now. The decision to invent Tara hadn't been part of the original plan. It came from necessity after an experience with a man inside a man's body approximately 8 months after everything changed over. When asked what his name was, Trent was honest. He told the man it was Trent. The look on the man's face said it all. In an instant, his disposition changed from lust to disgust. "Goddamned abomination," he muttered. Trent had been preparing for moments like this since first getting a good look at his new self in the mirror. The lust part, not the disgust part. His new body was that of a stunning and very fit young woman in her early 20s, maybe even late teens. He had spent his entire first life being gawked at for his handsomeness. This was different. In the new world, there were no rules. So, when someone leered at him with lustful intent, there was real risk of it turning ugly. "Goddamned abomination," the man muttered again. He then moved on Trent with violent intent. What he didn't know was that Trent had been trained in various methods of self-defense, mostly for movie roles. He always took the training seriously. It had never come in handier. Trent sidestepped the attacking man and shoved him aside with his left arm. With his free right hand, he grabbed the knife he had clipped to his belt, whipped it out, and jammed it into the attacker's throat. Then he dragged it across and ripped it back out. The man's eyes went wide as the blood flowed from the gaping gash in his neck. He went pale as a ghost before falling to the ground. That was Trent's first. He spent the next 3 years working his way west from where he had woken up in what used to be Eastern Europe. He never did figure out exactly where it was that he had woken up. Those early days were a chaotic blur. Despite it being dangerous, he traveled alone. He just couldn't trust anyone. Every now and then, when he would find himself entwined with a group, that was when his old acting chops came in handy as he played the part of Tara, a woman from what used to be from America, who had jumped into the body of another woman. He had invented her after the abomination experience. His cover story to prevent people from knowing he was mismatched. During his downtime, he crafted her narrative and worked on her mannerisms. It was often easy to spot a mismatched person because they tended to move awkwardly within a body they weren't used to operating. He spent months perfecting his Tara movements and would continue refining them for years to come. The details of whom Tara had been in the old world changed a lot during those first few years. For a time, she had been a teenager in Wisconsin. Then she had been a retired teacher from Kansas. Then a talent agent from Los Angeles. It was the closest thing Trent would ever get to acting again, and he played his part to perfection. His encounters with groups never lasted long. He was sure to rid himself of them at first opportunity. That was until he stumbled across the Netk. It was sometime during year 3. He had made his way into the northern portion of what used to be Greece. He was scavenging some ruins when he found himself surrounded by an organized scavenging outfit. He thought for sure they would kill him. Instead, they cuffed him, threw him in the back of their wagon, and brought him back to their home base, someplace called Old Glory. He was enjoying a quiet breakfast with Dan. When Jeffrey attempted to join, Trent told him that he had an official Netk business to discuss with Dan that required privacy. Although true, it was a conversation that could have easily been had during the upcoming 2-hour ride to the Newcastle capital. Figured that was why he wanted just the two of you for dinner, said Dan once Jeffrey was gone. Trent just sighed. Dan shook his head. Never gets old, does it? You get used to it. So, should we discuss strategy for the meeting? Talking points, all that? No, I got it. Honestly, I just want to get some peace and quiet while I eat. Fine by me. The breakfast was delicious. Eggs and sausage with toast and freshly squeezed orange juice. If there was one person in the new world whom Trent had considered telling the truth about himself, it was Dan. They had come up in the Netk together. Dan had Trent's back from day one. Even he was under the impression that Trent was actually Tara. It had been nearly 15 years since Trent told someone the truth about his new world self, that he was mismatched. By the end of today, that streak would be broken. Only briefly. Then he would go back to playing the part of Tara. He wondered if there would ever come a day when he went public with the truth. Then he thought about all the things he had done, all the ways he'd used his new body in the new world. If people in the Netk knew the truth, it would surely spell trouble. Upon arriving in Old Glory, Trent was escorted into a cell, and the cuffs were unshackled from his wrists. Soon after, someone delivered a tray of food. Real food, not prisoner slop. A plate that was half spaghetti and half ravioli. They also gave him a glass of clean water. The person delivering the food took note of Trent's surprise. From cans. Makes sense, but, seems a bit much for you, for a prisoner. Well, you're not actually a prisoner yet. That'll be up to you in the morning when you meet with placement. Weren't so late, you'd be meeting with them tonight. What the hell are you talking about? The guard laughed. Don't worry about it, ma'am. Cool if I call you ma'am? Yes. Right on. Well, then don't worry about it, ma'am. Just enjoy your food and get some rest. Pretty girl like you. Just say the right things and you'll be out of here in the morning. Before Trent could ask a follow-up, the guard had turned on their heels and was gone. He ate his canned pasta in silence, then paced for a while before giving in to exhaustion. Not long after waking up the next morning, he was greeted by an official-looking person in a man's body, flanked by 2 guards also in men's bodies. English? Trent nodded. Yes. The official one made a note on his clipboard. Name? Excuse me? Your name. Oh, Tara. So that would make you matched? By that you mean you match. Your body and mind are both female. Yes, I'm matched. The official one made another note on his clipboard. So what's all this about? Asked Trent. The official one simply held up his hand. Stop. Are you a threat? A what? A threat. If I open this cell and let you walk out of here without restraints, am I going to have a problem? Trent put both his hands up. Listen, sir, I'm not trying to hurt anyone. Was minding my own business, picking through that old house when your people surrounded me. Next thing I know, I'm in this cell. If anyone's a threat, it's you guys." The official one made more notes on his clipboard, then looked up at the guard to his right. "Open the cell. No restraints." The guard did as told, and the official one instructed Trent to follow him. He did. He was led into a meeting room and sat in a lone chair. On the other side of the room was a long table, with 3 people sitting on the other side of it. There were also 6 armed guards in the room. It reminded Trent of a parole board hearing, at least how often they had been portrayed in the movies. The 3 people at the table were with placement, a department within the newly formed NETC. This was the first time Trent had heard of the NETC. The head of placement, a woman in a woman's body named Donna, gave Trent the 3-penny verbal tour of the NETC, who they were, how they had formed, what their mission was. After Donna's speech, the panel peppered Trent with questions. They wanted to know about his background and skills. Playing the part of Tara, he spun a yarn about having been in college when things changed over. He lied about having been pre-law. Seemed like something they would like. He did his best to sound intelligent and sane. They asked him if he was interested in joining the NETC. They promised him food, housing, and security within the borders of Old Glory. They assured him that he would be given a job with plenty of room for advancement. They also gave him the night to think it over. He didn't need the night. "After what I've been dealing with these past few years, and what you're selling sounds pretty nice. I'm in." They presented him with a contract. It had been typed via old-fashioned typewriter. It outlined his commitment to the NETC, to serve the company with loyalty and honesty, to never abandon the cause. Breaking any company bylaws was punishable by death. It seemed harsh, but if it meant he no longer had to roam the landscape scavenging for food and shelter while avoiding attacks, then it was a fair trade. He signed and was officially part of the NETC. His first year was spent training. He learned self-defense, how to use weapons, how to pick locks, survival skills, and more. He already knew self-defense and weapons from his acting days, but in playing the part of Tara, he acted as if it was all new to him. After the year of training, he was assigned to scavenging duty. That was where he met Dan. They were part of the same scavenging crew. 1 year after that, he was given the opportunity to join a caravan, but declined. He liked the scavenger life. It was dangerous, but not as dangerous as caravanning seemed. This was the early days, the exploratory years. No one knew if the caravans would work, and Trent didn't feel like risking his life to find out. Sometime around year 7, a caravan crew returned from what used to be Tuscany with a story that not only caught Trent's eye, it blew his mind. They told of a powerful settlement that was more advanced than any they had seen outside of Old Glory. And you won't believe who's running it. Trent fucking Steele. Well, not Trent Steele, but the dude's wearing his body. How about that? Fucking America's heartthrob and shit. Trent nearly fainted. For years, he had assumed that his real body was killed in the chaos that overtook Rome during those first hours and days. To hear that his body was still alive, and in a position of power and influence, was astounding. Since joining the NETC, he had been content with the simple life as a scavenger, but no more. He knew he had to one day get face to face with himself. He also knew that it wouldn't be easy. He would have to be patient and work for it. He soon went from being a trusted NETC employee and citizen to regularly competing for end-of-the-month and even end-of-the-year awards and bonuses. The promotions followed. By year 8, he had been promoted to associate scavenger. By year 10, he was a managing scavenger, which meant he ran his own crew. Dan was his assistant manager. Dan wasn't managerial material. He was more muscle than brains, but loyal as a German shepherd. Trent was lucky to have him both as a co-worker and a friend. In year 11, he was taken out of the field and given an office job as a regional scavenging director. This was where things got tricky. Now he had to play office politics. Everyone assumed that the mind living inside that of a gorgeous woman's body was also that of a woman. Soon all the executives were making their plays. He soon began sleeping with Dino, whom he deemed the most tolerable and logical of all. Dino was someone with the mind of a man living in the body of a man. He had originally been from Greece, and in the old world he had fought like hell to go home after things changed over. He walked with a severe limp that he didn't like to talk about. Dating Dino proved to be Trent's least favorite aspect of playing the part of Tara. He did not like being with a man as a woman, but he had done it before in the early years, but those had mostly been one-offs, a means of short-term survival. Being with Dino was a long play and required real perseverance. It also served to keep the rest of the executives at bay, and it was good for his career. Dino was a senior executive. He had had a lot of power and influence. Even though Trent didn't need much help getting promoted, having Dino on his side couldn't hurt. In year 14, Trent was finally promoted to principal, the highest necked position that wasn't executive level. It was essentially corporate jargon for problem solver. Trent worked with various NETC teams to solve existing problems as well as prevent new ones. One of the many perks of being a principal was having an assistant, bodyguard. Trent was finally able to get Dan out of the field and into the office. They had remained best friends even after Trent's promotion, but Dan's limitations had kept him on the scavenging team with no hope of promotion for anything other than being Trent's assistant, bodyguard. Shortly after Trent's promotion, Dino ended things. In public, Trent played the part of being heartbroken. In private, he was ecstatic. He also used the heartbreak as an excuse to avoid getting involved with other male executives. It was a relief. Finally, in year 15, he got the break he had been waiting for. It all began with the detective. They had struck up a friendship years earlier while the detective was spending a winter in Old Glory. Trent found both the detective's New World work and Old World life fascinating. Per the detective's request, Trent had booked him passage to the Newcastle capital with a caravan. It was for the investigation he'd been obsessing over for years, the one that had driven him nearly mad. About a week later, Trent received a call on the wire, the detective requesting books in exchange for information that could break his case open. Trent had to pull some strings, but he made it happen. A few weeks later, he got word that his detective friend had been found dead outside of Waters Way. 2 days after that, Trent got a visit from Ron, one of the senior executives. Ron was pissed. He had been the one to approve the final sign-off on the book exchange with the assumption that it would lead to the detective finally putting an end to the serial killer known as the Skinner. With the detective dead, the books were now a sunk cost. The NETC didn't like sunk costs. "Can't believe I let you talk me into that." Ron was pacing back and forth in Trent's office while Trent sat calmly at his desk and Dan observed from the couch. "Investment logic was sound, Ron. You know that. Books that we have a surplus of in exchange for the Skinner. How many of our caravanners and scavengers has he killed?" "Too many to count." "Risk worth taking. I stand by it." Ron looked at Trent and shook his head. You're not wrong. But, that's not how the board sees it. They see it as an opportunity." "What kind of opportunity?" "Newcastle owes us." He leaned over Trent's desk and tapped it with his right pointer finger. "A debt that needs to be repaid." "And how do you propose they repay it?" "Finish the detective's investigation." Trent massaged his face. Not only did Ron have a point, but his idea had sparked an idea. This issue with Newcastle, this debt, provided an opportunity for Trent, the exact one he had been waiting years for. "I love it," he finally said to Ron, "and I think I should be the one to deliver it, in person. I'll put together a caravan and be on the road in 48 hours. You? You want to go back in the field? After all these years? Didn't you turn down a caravan role?" "Yeah, but, back in year 5, it seemed like an unnecessary risk. You know how I feel about unnecessary risks. But, now I trust our caravanners, and I think it would send a strong message to Newcastle. You know, sending a principal in person." Ron nodded. "We're always saying upstairs that a strong relationship with the GNT means a stronger NETC. I'm going to have to run this up the flagpole, but I think it's a home run." Ron mimicked swinging a baseball bat. Trent pretended to track it as it went into the non-existent bleachers. After Ron left, Dan finally spoke up. "What the fuck, Tara? Hit the road?" "What can I say?" Trent cracked a smile that Dan could not decipher. "I've always wanted to see Newcastle." Finally, there it was in all its glory. Up close and personal. Newcastle, the capital, the original, where it all began. Before it had been a full-on territory, it was just a settlement, and that settlement began in the castle. On the other side of those walls was the person living in Trent's original body. How many people have had the opportunity to come face to face with their real body? Trent wondered as the caravan reached the gate. Only Trent and Dan were allowed inside the gates of the capital. Everyone else had to wait down at the inn. He would be lying if he said he wasn't nervous. He had waited years for this moment. An opportunity he had never been certain he would ever get. Yet there it was, right in front of him. He just had to keep playing the part, get to the meeting, and then what? He wasn't quite certain how things would play out in the meeting. He had imagined it countless times over the years, but there was no way of being able to predict what it would be like once he was in it. He couldn't script it. He would have to improv. The security process to get into the Newcastle capital was worse than getting on a plane in the old world. Trent and Dan passed with ease. They were the furthest thing from threats. After passing security, they were brought across the courtyard to a newer-looking building that clearly hadn't been part of the original castle. Trent couldn't help but admire how well-kept everything was and how efficient it seemed to be running. The net prided itself on efficiency, and apparently Newcastle did too. Trent had made sure to set the meeting as private. One-on-one with him and Newcastle's founder. No bodyguards, no record keepers, not even Dan. Dan hadn't liked the idea, but Trent assured him it was for the best. He said it would show trust, which would help strengthen NETC-GNT relations. Seemed logical enough. The building had been a classy restaurant in the old world and was now used for meetings. It was empty when Trent walked in. He took a seat and waited. 5 minutes later, the door opened, and in walked himself. He did his best to keep a poker face, to play the part. But in those initial seconds, when he first saw his former body, he let his guard down. It was hard not to. His mind short-circuited, and he let out an audible gasp before reining things back in. It didn't matter, though. The founder had caught it. He laughed. "It's funny," said the founder. "Even after 15 years, I still get that reaction when people see Trent Steele for the first time." Trent stood up. "Play the part," he reminded himself. "First business, then personal." I'm sorry. I was aware, but, well, can we discuss that later? I'm Tara." His left hand, the founder held the bottle of wine. In his right was one glass. He set them down on the table before reaching his right hand out toward Trent. "Henry, pleasure to meet you." They shook hands, and Trent felt an electric shock run through his body upon touching his old hand. He suddenly felt dehydrated and a little dizzy. "Keep it together, man. Keep it together." As they sat down, he took the moment of quiet needed for them to settle in as an opportunity to examine the current state of his former housing. He had to hand it to the founder. He looked good. There were the natural signs of aging that were expected, but he looked good. Hard work had kept him in shape. Sun exposure had worn his face, but he looked good. Trent really did have to hand it to this Henry fellow. He had done his body well. "So," said Henry, breaking the silence, "a principal of the net left the office and rode all the way up here to Newcastle just to meet with me. What's up?" It was time to lock in. Trent imagined the clapboard being clapped and the direction yelling action. "A debt." "Excuse me?" "You've taken on a debt to the NETC that must be repaid." "Really don't mince words, do you?" Trent had practiced these words several times during the trip, his lines. He didn't want to trip over them once it was showtime, and it was showtime. He couldn't predict or script how the rest of the conversation would go, but he could script his opening dialogue. No pauses, no ums, no hesitations. You're a confident NTC principal who is all about business and knows exactly what she wants. You don't get to be an NETC principal by beating around the bush. I guess not. The founder picked up the wine bottle. I don't drink, but, I do believe in being a good host, and I've been told this wine is quite good. So consider this bottle a gift. You can have some here while we talk or bring it home. Your choice. Watching Henry deliver that speech, Trent wondered how many times he had said it. Either way, considering what was happening, what was about to happen, a little wine sounded nice. Think I'll have some now. Maybe take the rest with. Henry nodded and began uncorking, then pouring. From my private stash. Keep it around for special occasions. And the NETC principle is indeed a special occasion. He slid Trent's glass across the table. Trent picked up. What should we toast to? Asked Henry. You don't have a drink. I'm used to toasting without one, but pretend I do. Trent thought about it for a moment. Play the part. How about a long and healthy relationship between the GNT and the net? Love it. Trent pretended to tap his glass with an invisible one before taking a sip. Good, huh? I've had Newcastle Red before, but yes, hard to beat. All right, Principal. I can tell by the look on your face that you really want to get into it, so let's get into it. Trent nodded, took another sip, then wiped his lips and set his glass down. He remembered the lines he had rehearsed. They were still in Act 1. He got back in character and played his part. The detective. Henry winced, then rubbed his forehead with his right hand. Tough loss. You're aware of the exchange, right? The books? You mean the books? Correct. Books in exchange for information that could help the detective bring the killer known as the Skinner to justice. And he failed. So you want repayment. Henry rolled his eyes. And how do you propose we repay that debt? Simple. You have plenty of able-bodied soldiers in the GNT. Send some after the Skinner. Pick up the detective's trail. When he's dead, we'll consider the debt repaid. Henry laughed. Not a small casual laugh, a loud, hearty laugh. This caught Trent off guard. It hadn't been in the script he'd had in mind for this meeting. Perhaps he was going to have to switch to improv sooner than hoped. What? What's so funny? Well, my friend, this might just be the easiest negotiation you ever have. How so? Can't get into it. International Newcastle stuff. Sure you understand. But I like to think I can scrounge up a few able bodies to send out to Water's Way and all that. That simple? Henry nodded. Yeah, I think so. They discussed it some more, hammering out the details. Trent presented Henry with a contract of intent, stating that to fulfill its debt to the net, the GNT would commit all necessary resources to finishing the detective's work. Henry read it, then signed. Well, Miss Principal, I think this concludes our business. Just one more thing. Trent took a deep breath. This was the moment he had been waiting for. More business? Asked Henry. No, I'm... Get it together, Trent. You've rehearsed this. I'm afraid this is personal. Where do I begin? He scratched his head. Honestly, it's been hell holding this in since you walked in. There's a reason I volunteered to come here to negotiate. A personal one. Henry sighed as if he knew what was coming. Not going to tell me I was your celebrity crush in the old world, are you? I'll tell you what I tell everyone else. I'm not Trent Steele, just wearing his body. I know you're not Trent Steele. I am. You okay, boss? Trent was ignoring Dan. He just didn't want to talk. He was lost in the thought as he stared at the softly falling rain from his seat in the wagon. He hadn't any expectations for how things would play out once he revealed his true self to Henry. How was the founder to react upon meeting the mind that had once belonged to the body he now inhabited? First, Trent had to prove it. Easy enough. He brought up Mariposa and their breakfast at the fancy hotel in Rome, an image that hadn't faded one bit from his mind in 15 years, as well as what both he and Mariposa had been wearing. My God, was all Henry could say. They spent the next hour swapping stories about their old lives and their new. Trent got to know more about Henry than any Newcastle citizen outside of Henry's wife ever would. When there was nothing left to say, Trent thanked Henry for doing right by his body. Henry let Trent know that if he ever needed anything, to not hesitate to reach out. They did not bring up the Skinner again. Henry was now the only person in the world who knew Trent's secret, that he wasn't Tara. They said their goodbyes. Then Trent and Dan took their leave of the Newcastle capital, linked back up with their caravan, and began the journey back east. As convenient as it would have been to stop at Guidance for the night, Trent ordered the caravan to push on east. They would instead stay at a GNT border settlement. 6 hours later, and Trent still hadn't said a word. He was lost in thought, reflecting upon having the incredibly rare opportunity to reunite with his real body. He heard Dan's periodic attempts at sparking up a conversation, but chose to ignore them. What would there be to say? Hey Dan, you'll never guess I'm not the Tara you've been friends with for over a decade. I'm actually Trent Steele, and I just met my real body. Pretty cool, huh? The most powerful emotion he felt was closure. Seeing himself after 15 long years of living in the wrong body had put his mind at ease. And he couldn't talk to anyone about it, since he had never met anyone else who had done it. But it was as if the weight of two worlds had been lifted off his shoulders. After more than a decade of climbing the corporate ladder at the Netc in hopes of meeting himself, he could finally close that book and move on to another. All that was left was to do everything he could to enjoy the rest of his new life. He leaned back in his seat as the caravan arrived outside the gates of GNT Border Settlement 6. The thought of enjoying the rest of his life brought a smile to his face. No more waiting. No more wondering. No more what's next. Just live the life he had built for himself. Enjoy it as best as possible. Yeah, he could do that.